Episode 5 of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, In the Name of the Mother, for me can almost be split into two separate episodes. The Trial of Seven we've been building up for the last 4 weeks, and the flashback with young Dunk. Now, before we really get into this, I need to get the point across that I really did love this episode, and it did meet my crazily high expectations I had coming into it, which is not something that most adaptations can achieve. But I will say this, Ira Parker made some very bold creative choices with the structure of this episode. And even after watching it 3 times now, I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about it and how successful that approach was. What I really loved about this opening sequence of the episode is the briefest moment of camaraderie between Dunk's 7, which is something I wish we had seen more of in the last episode. It would make the deaths and losses impact even harder. I also want to highlight Humphrey Beesbury. He seemed like a very interesting character, and it's a real shame that from what I've been told, his expanded role and most of his scenes were cut from the show. He was supposed to have bigger roles in the parties of Lionel Baratheon, for example. I did enjoy the inclusion of Dunk and Raymond Fossaway being sick with nerves, because something that really gets overlooked is how young they truly are in the book, and the fact they are green boys. This is their first true taste of real combat. A cool detail I overlooked myself when I read the books is, of course, Raymond is going to have hardly any armour, given he's literally just become a knight and didn't come to the tourney with this idea of fighting with live steel in a Trial of 7. So that alone goes to show just how ride or die he is for Dunk. I think the moment the horses all set off, the way it's all been shot, we can tell as a viewer this is going to be a chaotic and brutal fight. I want to briefly touch upon Egg for a moment here. I really loved the callback to Dunk telling him not to rob him or he'll chase him down with dogs. It's a really nice full circle moment in their relationship. I also like the fact they call back to Egg training Thunder in episode 2, because what came to pass is exactly what Egg predicted. Dunk or Thunder hesitated. I do wonder if Thunder was able to hear Egg, and that's why he was finally able to set off. Regardless, the point of view shots of us as Duncan as he rides in, and the sheer heaviness of the lance blow is not something we've seen in a Song of Ice and Fire TV show before. This fighting at the trial feels very slow, heavy, but deliberate. In a way, it adds to the tension and makes it feel more real. You feel every blow. Having read the book, I of course knew Dunk was going to get the shit beaten out of him, from the first lance blow to the fall from Thunder, but I never pictured the lance wound being that serious. It makes sense in hindsight, of course, but in my head, if Dunk was able to fight on the way he did, then it wouldn't have been that bad of a blow. We get the lance hit, Dunk's fall into the mud, and then we cut to the most controversial part of this episode, and something I think is going to be hotly debated for a very long time to come. Cutting into the extended flashback sequence as Dunk is hit and falls is a very bold choice. You've just energized the viewers with the start of the trial. The anticipation is palpable. The whole show has led to this point, then bang, Dunk is knocked off his horse, and we spend the next 20 minutes in a flashback. Yes, the placement thematically fits, but as a storyteller you risk losing the viewer's attention with such a sudden, jarring and unexpected move. Part of me wishes they had just stuck with the action and played it straight. Another was genuinely compelled to see what Ira Parker was going to do with Dunk's backstory and how much of it we were going to see. Now, it seems Dunk's backstory is vaguely similar to the book. We lack the larger friend group, and Rafe, for all intents and purposes, might as well be an original character anyway, as we know so little about them in the book. Hell, we don't even know their gender in the book. But yeah, I did find the relationship between Dunk and Rafe compelling to watch. These two young kids desperately hoping for a better life and doing anything they can to get away, but at the same time being very aware that, hell, what if this is as good as it gets? It really does encapsulate the struggle of the poor and the small folk of Westeros. You can work yourself to death, but there's still no hope of ever escaping your lot in life. It was also very nice to finally get a proper look at Flea Bottom on TV. Yes, we've had glimpses of it in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, but this time we really did get a good insight into the sheer poverty and desperation of the small folk. The moment they established Rafe and Dunk's relationship, it was clear she was going to meet a bloody end, with it all but confirmed the minute she pickpocketed the gold cloak. Her death was not exactly harrowing or sad, because it was very clearly telegraphed, but you do feel awful for Dunk, and it does hit home the hard reality of Flea Bottom. We have Sir Arlen the Pennytree, who shuts down all the doubters about his ability. No, he's not a shit knight. Even off his face drunk, he was able to deal with these gold cloaks with ease. His cry of "in the name of the mother," I think it could become iconic as in a Song of Ice and Fire TV moment. A little Easter egg I loved during this sequence is when Dunk sneaks into Arlen's camp. We see the grave of Roger a Pennytree, who was Arlen's nephew and squire that was killed at the Battle of the Redgrass Field. Just a nice nod to the book, and maybe gives context as to why Arlen is so drunk right now. He's grieving. Speaking of the Redgrass Field, I'm still unsure if the battlefield Duncan and Rafe were looting at the start of the flashback was supposed to be the Redgrass or not. If it's meant to be the Redgrass, it's definitely not the kind of place I pictured, and way closer to King's Landing than I thought. But again, the books are so vague, the Redgrass Field can be whatever the show needs it to be. I'm guessing it might be the Redgrass Field, given that Roger a Pennytree literally seems to have just died. At first, I was a bit puzzled with Dunk seemingly following Arlen for what, days? But I guess it does thematically fit, showing his sheer will and determination. Exactly what he needs in the trial of 7 if he's going to overcome what's in front of him. Like I said, I'm very conflicted about the flashback. It was a bold choice by Ira Parker. It really does kill the momentum of the trial of 7 and give you severe tonal whiplash. But at the same time, it does work really well as a framing device for the trial itself, especially with Arlen telling Dunk to, well, get up, then cutting back into the sudden chaos of the fighting. The content of the flashback itself was also very well done, and in all did serve a narrative purpose. But I can't help but think that pacing-wise, they could have cut this long flashback up into segments and spread them across each episode. I would then have the final flashback in episode 5 as Dunk gets knocked down, ending with Arlen telling him to get up. This way we still get the interesting backstory and narrative, but we don't jeopardise the pace of the episode itself. Like I said, I don't know how I truly feel about this sequence. I don't think I will for a long time. I think as a book fan, first and foremost, knowing where the story is going, I don't mind the flashback and enjoyed the lore dump and references. But I do worry how casual viewers are going to feel about it. I will say this about Ira Parker. He has said in interviews he knew the flashback in that moment was going to be divisive, and he knew there was going to be fans who did not like it, but he felt it was too important tonally to the story and Dunk's journey not to include it. It elevates, in his view, the rest of the trial of 7 as a result. I appreciate his honesty, and his acknowledgement is not going to sit well for some. Most showrunners would bury their head in the sand and pretend everything is golden and perfect. Now for me, one minor nitpick. We knew we were getting this flashback at some point, and part of me was really hoping we would get a Bloodraven cameo, especially since we know that Dunk once saw him with the Raven's teeth in King's Landing. But I guess we still have time for this in season 2 and 3, so I'm not going to mark the showdown because of that. Dunk waking up to the sheer chaos around him is a great moment. More importantly, I love seeing the other duels happening in the background and the drive-by carnage of those who are still mounted. It is a shame we don't get to see more of, say, Raymond versus Stefan, or a more focused moment between, say, Baelor and Maekar, or Aerion taking his dive. But I understand that this is Duncan's story, Duncan's point of view, and to shift focus away from him and Aerion at this moment would be a disservice to that. Out of all of the cutaways during this moment, however, seeing a Baelor absolutely ram Maekar off his horse with a lance while on foot was spectacular. Because of the quick cutting and sound design, you really feel the blow. In fact, the sound design overall was probably the best they've ever done in a battle so far. Now, so often in medieval and fantasy TV shows, everyone just seems to use swords and shields. And like House of the Dragon with Sir Criston Cole, it's nice seeing Aerion use a Morning Star. Yes, I know it's technically a flail, but George R. R. Martin often interchanges Morningstar, mace, and flail all the time. But when you're dueling someone in plate armor, or even if they've just got a helm, something like a flail or a blunt weapon is a really good choice because of, well, the blunt force damage you will do is more effective against armor than, say, a slashing weapon. But again, the sound design and point of view from Dunk as the blows come and come again really make this fight feel brutally real in a way we've never seen before on screen for A Song of Ice and Fire. It's very clear that Aerion has been trained well and has a mind for combat. For example, using his dagger to try and get at Dunk's eye slit, and the targeting of clear weak points in Dunk's well-made but simple and rudimentary armor when compared to his own custom tailor-made set. What is also clear is the general skill difference between Aerion and Dunk. There is no doubt that Aerion, in a straight-up duel, he would be the more skilled combatant. You can see the years of training from the finest master-at-arms money can buy, training that Dunk lacks. While he can certainly use a sword, you can see that Dunk's forte is going to be his sheer size and strength rather than pure skill and finesse. And we see that play out as Dunk is stabbed again and again and again with well-timed and placed strikes, slowly wearing him down. But given Dunk's own abilities, all he needs to do, and all he needed, was a single opening, a single moment to make Aerion hurt. Going for the leg was a clever move, because it's going to limit and slow the more skilled foe. Now, I think a lot of viewers without a wider context of the lore of the books misunderstand Maekar as a character. Context is important. While he's always felt underappreciated and overlooked, we must recall that his wife has literally died a few months prior to Ashford, and he's having to deal with his troublesome sons, as well as his and their own grief. As much as Aerion is a cock, Maekar would do anything to protect his children. He takes down Lionel Baratheon and has to be subdued by both Baelor and Lionel to stop him from reaching Dunk. What's even more tragic is it seems to be this moment that Maekar makes his deadly blow that costs Baelor his life. The moment where both Aerion and Dunk fall to the floor tells you all you need to know about how hard this fight has been for both of them. Dunk is basically a walking corpse, where a gust of wind could topple him. I enjoy the fact that even in this moment, Aerion still tries to compel Dunk to give up and yield. While Aerion was in a far better state than Dunk, he knows how badly wounded he himself is. Now, a fair criticism of this sequence is questioning, did they go too far with how badly wounded Dunk is? I know in the books he does get very badly messed up with his eye, the lance wound, and several other minor wounds, but I don't know if it was just seeing it in live action and the reality of the brutal nature of it. It seems impossible that Dunk would be able to take half of those stabs and still be breathing. But then again, I guess he is on death's door, and adrenaline does crazy things to people. When Dunk goes down in the mud, he legitimately looked dead. My fiancé was convinced he really died. I personally think they probably went a little bit too far with how dead he looked. I think some shallow breaths would have helped. But Dunk getting up and finishing the fight was a hell of a moment. The scene very much having heart and impact thanks to Egg in the stands. We'll come back to him in a moment. When Dunk does get up, he now very much is Dunk of Flea Bottom and uses the more direct street fighting, brawling skills from his childhood to beat Aerion. It's clearly not a style of combat Aerion was expecting or used to fighting. It's obvious why they chose a 6'5" ex-rugby player in Peter Claffey as Dunk. There are few actors out there with the physical ability to pull off this kind of role in such a convincing way and be a good actor. So I'm going to backtrack to Egg slightly. His reaction to the Trial of Seven itself really gets across to the viewer just how deeply rooted his hatred for Aerion runs, how quickly and deeply he's become attached to Duncan. This bond has formed between them that transcends Egg's own family. It was genuinely harrowing watching Egg cry out to Dunk to get up. The sheer desperation. The casting of Egg was always going to be a huge challenge, but the little Egg had to do this episode alone proves without a doubt that Dexter Sol Ansell is a special talent and at such a young age truly understands the character he's playing and the relationship he has with the people around him. Again, while I know Dunk gets beaten to hell and back during the trial, the reality of it certainly surpassed what I had pictured. One of my favourite moments in the book is when Dunk is taken from the field by Raymond and Pate, and the first thing he thinks of is the fate of his fellow seven, who had put their lives on the line for him, and the sorrow he feels for their loss, for the loss of Humphrey Harding and Humphrey Beesbury. What's important to understand here is while Dunk won the trial, he is very, very badly wounded, and if not cared for properly, could easily die. I would have loved to have watched this scene with no knowledge of the books, and what was about to happen as Baelor entered. The moment I saw him, and how well unsteady he was, filled me with a sense of dread for what I knew was coming. We have Dunk swearing himself to Baelor, and Baelor telling Dunk he needs men like him, only for it quickly to turn into abject tragedy. The look on Raymond's face as Baelor mentions the cracked visor. He knew before he even touched Baelor what was happening. Baelor losing the feeling in his hands is bad, and with his vision starting to go so much he thinks he's still wearing a visor, then the reveal of his injury. Well, it's just as gory as I imagined. With the death of Baelor, it's not just the death of a genuinely good man, but the best king Westeros never had. A true shattering loss. A small detail I love that isn't made expressly clear in the show itself is the reason the blow in the head was so damaging for Baelor is because his armour didn't fit him properly. He was actually wearing, I believe, his son Valar's armour. While he could get it on and fight in it, it wasn't necessarily a perfect fit. The armour was not made for him. Thus, when he took Maekar's mace to the back of the head, due to the helm not fitting quite right, the back of his skull took the full force of the blow. There was even a little Easter egg last episode, when he entered the tourney grounds. When he takes off his helm, he struggles to do so slightly, suggesting it doesn't quite fit him. I do wonder, when people watch it back, if they can piece it together. Rating this episode is actually a real challenge and the hardest episode to rate so far. I would give the Trial of 7 portion a solid 9 out of 10. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, and I do wish we'd seen more of the other combatants. Yeah, we saw the Fossways, Maekar and Baelor, but only for brief moments. Yes, it would be great to see the Laughing Storm do his thing, but this really isn't that show. Dunk and Egg are the core and heart of the story, so it makes sense why Ira Parker stuck to their point of view. Do I think there is a compromise between the two? Yes. But for me, it doesn't take away enough from what we did get to make much of a difference. Most realistic, gritty and brutal combat we've seen from A Song of Ice and Fire on TV so far. Now the flashback. I would give that a solid 7 out of 10. I totally get the need to flesh out Duncan's backstory. I think the actual content of the flashback was well done. His relationship with Rafe, seeing the slums of Flea Bottom, and the kind of man Sir Arlen the Pennytree really was. It's really important character stuff that I love. But I can't help but feel it was a very risky move, placing a 20-minute flashback into an action sequence that people have been looking forward to for weeks, right as the first few blows hit. Yes, it thematically fit well, but it absolutely blew up the pace to a standstill, going from high octane of the trial to the meandering pace of the flashback. Like I said before, was tonal whiplash. And as much as I enjoyed the content, I found myself just wanting to get back to the trial itself. I know several of my friends who've only ever watched the show did really struggle with this aspect. I don't know if it was the right call by Ira Parker to do it this way. Like I said, if I was writing the show, I would have cut the whole walking part of the flashback and have the whole Arlen Dunk get up part right after the fight where Rafe was killed, then divide the rest of the flashback before it into several pieces and pepper them through the prior episodes. In episode 5 still have a flashback, but perhaps make it just the build up to the fight between the Goldcloaks, Dunk, Rafe and Arlen. That way it fits in with the pace of the rest of the episode and we still get full context of the flashback and Dunk's backstory throughout the season. Maybe that way we've gotten to know Rafe over a few weeks. Fans may have actually cared more when she died. So yeah, I'm very conflicted about the flashback, and I don't think I will settle on how I feel about it for a long time. If I'm giving the trial itself a 9 and the flashback a 7, I guess we split the difference and call the episode an 8 out of 10, which is very consistent with the rest of the season as a whole. I have a feeling, however, as I watch the episode a few more times in the future and give it a bit more time and reflection, I can see that score slowly creeping up to a 9.